From Our Savior's Atonement Lutheran Church on Bennett Avenue in the Heights of New York City, welcome to Inwood Artworks On Air, where we spotlight the writers, filmmakers, musicians, theater makers, and artists of all varieties who make their home here in Upper Manhattan. I'm Aaron Sims.
I'm Jonathan Bell.
And this is Live and Local. It's our podcast dedicated to showcasing and celebrating the musicians of Upper Manhattan. We talk about their work and, best of all, hear them do their thing. Who is our guest today, Jonathan?
Aaron, today we have composer and cellist Paul Brantley, a 5-time MacDowell Colony Fellow who has also received fellowships from Banff Center and the Anderson Center. He has recently enjoyed performances of his music by The Knights, Horszowski Trio, Flux Quartet, Minneapolis Guitar Quartet, New Esterhazy Quartet, and Memphis Symphony. Brantley recently composed a cello concerto, the Royal Revolver. His On the Pulse of Morning will receive performances this spring on the 25th anniversary of its composition by the Washington Heights Chamber Orchestra in New York City. In addition to positions at Syracuse University and Washington and Lee University, Brantley was a Manhattan School of Music artist faculty. He is a director and cellist of the newly formed Mercury Chamber Players. His music is published by Oxford University Press and Bill Holla Music. A busy guy, we are very fortunate to have him with us today on Live and Local, Aaron.
Please enjoy Paul Brantley. Paul, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, it's thank you for having me. It's good to be here. It's good to be anywhere, even virtually. So no, but thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Sure. Well, happy to have you here on air. What are the names of the pieces you just played, if you would?
Yeah. The first piece, all three of the solo cello pieces that I'm playing today are from this collection of solo cello pieces called Order or Ordre, however you would pronounce it in French. And the first one that you heard was called Malagasy Songs, which is, I kind of found two indigenous tunes from Madagascar and interleaved them. And then the second one, kind of fancifully called Le Cocteau. It's given that title because the group of pieces that I mentioned, Order, is modeled after these 17th century collections by composers like Couperin and Rameau. And instead of them just being a suite of like dances, they would be this whole hodgepodge of different kinds of pieces. And most pertinently, portrait pieces. Like they would like paint musical portraits of other artists that they admire, but primarily composers. Like Rameau even did a self-portrait, which he called La Rameau. And so modeling this collection after Couperin, it kind of gave me the license, the opportunity to do some time traveling and paint some portraits of some of my favorite, in particular, French artists, and so Jean Cocteau being a principal one. So that's why it has the kind of ridiculous title of Le Cocteau, because that's how Couperin would have done it. So
I'm wondering what the intersection is, if there is any, between this order, composition, and perhaps some of the trials and tribulations, shall we say, of this lockdown. And I'm wondering if your attraction for this type of collection of smaller portraits is it have anything to do with what you've been going through and why you gravitated to that.
well, no, and I'm sorry if I didn't clarify, but actually, all of those cello pieces were composed like 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh, well,
so they,
sorry about that.
So they don't have any direct bearing.
And it's not an ongoing.
No, because that collection has been published. In fact, it's a total of 15 solo cello pieces, and it came about because you mentioned this cello concertino that I wrote a few years ago, and so of course with cello and orchestra, and so kind of in preparation for that, I decided to write what I thought would be like just a couple of solo cello pieces as kind of a warm up, and then they just kept coming. It was amazing. So all the while that I was writing this cello concerto, I kept writing these solo cello pieces along with it, and usually as a composer, or me as a composer anyways, like I usually for a large piece or a large collection will have some kind of overview of what I hope to accomplish. I didn't at the time. They just kept coming, so I was going from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And so the best that I could do while I was in the heat of writing those pieces was just to try not to repeat myself. And it's really interesting too. You might think as a composer who's a cellist, I've written a lot of cello music, and we're kind of focusing on that right now. But kind of historically, the opposite is true. It's like I already know about the cello. I'm like bored with it, so I'd rather write for something else.
Could you say something about, if you don't mind, about just how the first piece, the Malagasy,
Yeah.
and specifically about the time and the meter, if there, it was a little bit bewildering to me in a lovely way.
Well, I'm glad it was lovely. And that's kind of exactly the appeal. If I can preface that by saying, like in the last, 10 years, it's like classical Indian music, West African music from Mali, and then discovering this music, this indigenous music from Madagascar. There's this rhythmic, what classical composers might refer to as being polyrhythmic or polymetric, but it's really not that. I think we've all had that experience when we listen to like Ravi Shankar in the middle of some giant raga or something that we might perceive the pulse, the groove being one thing, and then it starts metamorphosing into something else. And then I think what's incredible about that music is that it feels like you're in 2, sometimes 3 or 4 simultaneous time worlds.
I also wanted to briefly talk about, I really relate to you as a pianist and someone when I'm trying to write piano pieces. How do I get away from writing it the way it feels good? I really related to what you said there. And I just wanted to add that personally, some of the most interesting compositional assignments or aspirations I've had have come for composing for individual instruments, because it's forced me to be more, I wish there was a better way to put it, maybe you can help, more horizontal with harmony. And when I heard your cello pieces, I feel there's a lot of unavoidable arpeggiation that might otherwise not have been arpeggiated, and somehow that makes things a little bit like fascinating.
Yeah, it's very much related to what I was saying earlier. It's like, I have my habits as a cellist performer and as a cellist improviser. And so by having these literary models, by having these player models in mind, that helps transcend it. But then I'm the same thing when I'm writing for a new instrument for the first time, or a new collection of instruments. I mean, I love that idea of the composition being as medium specific as possible. I always think of Charlie Chaplin. And Charlie Chaplin, his brilliance exists because of it being silent, because of it being black and white, because of the camera being in one place. So his humor, his brilliance works within that frame, within those quote unquote limitations.
Right.
What would Charlie Chaplin be with CGI? You know what I mean? It's like that's the exact opposite. There's no frame. So again, like the recorded piece you're going to hear in a little while, which is for Baroque violin and Baroque cello and harpsichord, that is such a specific medium.
Paul, we're recording this here in the latter months of the COVID-19 pandemic here in 2020. You're among those who had a very serious case of the virus early on. And you eventually recovered, thank the Lord, and returned to composing with renewed energy. So what was it like going through that? And how has it helped you now, coming back now? Do you have a renewed invigoration towards composing and playing right now?
The last question, absolutely. But the earlier questions are much more difficult to respond to. It was extraordinarily. It did take place at the very beginning of the pandemic when not much was known, and I was a stay-at-home person. I went to the emergency room 3 times. But I was a stay-at-home, unless your lips were turning blue, is literally what I was told. I was receiving this extraordinary attention from on-phone doctors and teleconferences and the whole bit. But you were being told at the time, unless you literally cannot breathe and your lips are turning blue, that was their criteria at that point for either staying home or going to the hospital.
Wow.
And indeed, I couldn't breathe for 2 weeks completely, and then the recovery over the next 3 months while I was having these episodes. So it was very, 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 very challenging. For the first time in my life, I've been composing since I was about 7, and for about the first time in my life, for about 3 months, that went away with everything else, all the other classic things that, symptom-wise, that go away. And it was a nightmare. It was literally a nightmare. It was the most difficult thing, because it's like, I'm not saying I couldn't. It like went away, and who am I without that? And I'll tell you, this friend of mine is a wonderful playwright, posted on Facebook this excerpt from the 4 quartets of T.S. Eliot. But then it was like, yes, I'm going to attempt to make a setting of this. So I did. For soprano and clarinet and piano, I kind of just arbitrarily chose the Shepherd on the Rock trio combination of Schubert, and I don't know why, really. It just kind of came to me, and I literally have not stopped composing since. And I go from and which is very rare for me, because it used to take a lot of gestation time between pieces and rest, looking for. And it's like, it's really not compulsive, though. There's just been this incredible need to give expression to all of this.
Wow, what a story. Thank you for sharing. And I hope to hear those songs.
Me too.
At some point.
Me too.
Yeah. So Paul, can you tell us what else you're going to be playing for us?
Yeah. So the third piece is again another one of these portrait pieces that I alluded to from that same order collection. But instead of it being a portrait of a person, it's a portrait of a place. This, and again, excuse my poor French, but the Hotel Biron, which like in the early 1900s, I think like 1904 or something, this was Rodin's house. I first composed it in such a way, and I've never done this any other time, where I kind of intentionally left the form of it open-ended. I could go there if I wanted to. I could go there if I wanted to. I could come back to there if I wanted to. And I performed it that way, and I performed it here in that fashion. And I called it One Door, because there was one door in the Rodin Museum that was particularly moving to me. But when I decided to, when I was putting that order collection together, I decided to reshape one door into like a concise, hopefully a concise composition, and retitled it, the Hotel Biron.
Very good. Well, here it is. Once again, Paul Brantley.
Paul, that was marvelous, very enchanting and haunting. Some really beautiful melodic fragments for me are, I can still hear it floating in my head. And before getting into maybe a few other things, I wanted you to maybe help me understand what you mean, historically speaking, about the Moorish origins of the saraband. Well, I'm not familiar with that, and just wondering how that dance form and rhythm.
That statement of mine is a little bit controversial, but some of us believe that, all these Baroque dances that Bach and all those guys, Couperin, that they composed to, they're all from different countries and different cultures. And so we know that the saraband is Spanish. And so a lot of people, though, think that indeed it's not only Spanish, but Moorish Spanish. And, like the characteristic thing of a saraband has this kind of slow waltz triple feel, but it emphasizes the second beat somehow, right? And that they would like step into that. But I don't know if I can describe this. So, but I wasn't interested in writing a saraband.
Right.
The Moorish quality that I'm imagining. I'm not being musicologically correct. I'm being expressive.
Right.
The Moorish quality to me suggested more of a, instead of just being 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, which is very even and Western, but the Moorish quality suggested more of a kind of asymmetrical, uneven numbers of beats and inner beats.
Right.
And I just I'm drawn to that kind of thing. To me, the world is asymmetrical.
Right.
And truly Baroque, misshapen.
Right.
And so I like to follow those contours. And so I would like to think that it's suggestive for those who know and love sarabands, that it's suggestive of that dance, but that it bends time, and kind of takes you on a different journey, and it's like you touch one thing and everything else is affected, and so it affects the harmony. So it's like quasi-Baroque harmonically, but then it's much more expansive than that, and it goes on its own little journey. And there was and so why is that relevant? Because it's like the Hotel Biron, the Rodin Museum, is this old 17th century Baroque house. So
yes,
so I'm like vibing off of all of that.
Well, it's really fantastic to have someone who's so accomplished instrumentally and a composer. We haven't had, well, correction, Miguel, but it's amazing to have someone who is such a good composer and instrumentalist. And I'm just wondering what went into taking something that you were accustomed to playing in an extemporaneous fashion and to making it, as you put it, into something more concrete and concise and through composed. What compromises did you have to make, if any?
It's a really good question. It's almost like all those years of performing it in its kind of open-ended way. And it's not that the notes were improvised, it's more the form was improvised. It's like, again, I could go through that door, or I could go through another door, or if I go through that door, I could take a right turn, or I could take a left turn. That was kind of like the conceit at the time of composing it. So, I don't completely recall, but it's almost as if the more that I performed it, the more that it tended to want to settle in one particular direction.
Roadmap.
One was more effective than the other.
Right.
You kind of feel that from an audience. And so I think that's what happened more than anything. It's like it kind of settled into its own form.
Well, one thing don't want to be remiss in asking is, where can listeners go to follow your projects, the pieces that we've heard today, any of the compositions you've written?
Oh, well, thanks. The most immediate place to listen is my SoundCloud page, and then it also gives contact information there, and then I also have the quote unquote band page on Facebook. One casualty of these times is that in this period I've my personal website went away and it hasn't been resurrected yet. So anyway, but I'm easily contacted by Paul Brantley SoundCloud.
Very good.
That's the primary way.
Well, as you mentioned before, Paul, something virtually, you're reachable virtually, and also we wanted to bring people something virtually reachable as well from some of your larger compositions. We're going to get a chance to listen to one of your multi-instrument compositions, Du Combes, as it was performed by Music of the Spheres. And why did you select that work, may I ask?
Well, that was a wonderful commission. There's this extraordinary ensemble in the Bay Area called Music of the Spheres. There was also a Music of the Spheres here in New York, a completely different group. So the Bay Area one is this early music group, and it's a little bit flexible ensemble. But for this, it was Baroque violin and Baroque cello and harpsichord. And so they asked if I would write a piece. You know, they're normally used to playing just 17th and 18th century music. And so there's such wonderful artists that they're wanting to refresh the possibilities of what can be done with those old instruments. And so this is just the first of a 2-movement piece. The whole piece I call Dux Comes, which is leader follower. And to me, it's like kind of suggestive of a yin yang metaphor in a way. But,
Well, let's listen to it. This is Paul Brantley's composition, Du Combes, performed by Music of the Spheres. Paul, that was absolutely wonderful. We'll make sure to put links up to your functioning web pages on our Inwood Artworks On Air website. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, it's really been my great pleasure. It's this is literally the first time I've performed, except for playing a Yom Kippur service about a month ago, for 3 minutes. And so this is literally my first performance in about 9-10 months. So so that's very meaningful, and it's wonderful what you guys are doing. Bringing attention to all these extraordinary artists on this end of the island. So thank you.
It's our pleasure. So thank you, Paul, for joining Jonathan and I on this live and local edition of Inwood Artworks On Air, where we meet the musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home here in Upper Manhattan. If you have a moment, please show us some love right now by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. Thank you to our series Atonement Lutheran Church for hosting us, and to heightsites.com for promotional support. We also want to make sure you follow us on Inwood Artworks to keep with all we do, including the Inwood Film Festival, Filmmakers Al Fresco, pop-up art galleries, live performances, and so much more. You can support On Air and all our programming by making a tax-free donation at inwoodartworks.nyc/donate. Inwood Artworks On Air is made possible with funding from the NYC and Company Foundation, with support from Manhattan Borough President Gail A. Brewer and the NYSCA Electronic Media and Film Grant Program in partnership with Wave Farm Media Arts Assistance Fund, and the support of Governor Andrew Cuomo and the New York State Legislature. Thank you again for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims.
I'm Jonathan Bell.
For Inwood Artworks On Air.